He promised to protect her. Now he's their worst nightmare. The Promise Captain. Marcus Kane had never expected to find love among the stars, especially not with someone from a species most humans had never heard of. The Zephyrian colonies were remote, peaceful, known more for their crystalline architecture than their military might. That's where he'd met Lorelei during a routine diplomatic escort mission that had changed everything. Her people were tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like moonlight on water, and eyes that held depths of ancient wisdom. Lorelei was different even among her own kind, a scholar who spoke 17 languages and could navigate hyperspace calculations in her head. When she smiled, which she did often around Marcus, her entire being seemed to glow with an inner light that made the bridge of his ship feel warmer. "Your species fascinates me," she had told him one evening as they watched the binary sunset from the observation deck of the UES Valiant. "Humans are so young in galactic terms, yet you've accomplished what takes other species millennia." Marcus had laughed, running a hand through his graying hair. "We're stubborn, I'll give you that." "No," Lorelei had said seriously, her luminous eyes meeting his. "You're passionate. Everything you do with your whole hearts. It's beautiful." That was the moment Marcus knew he was lost. Over the following months, their friendship deepened into something neither had expected. Lorelei would spend hours on his ship, helping with translations, offering insights into alien cultures they encountered. The crew adored her, she remembered. Everyone's names, asked about their families, and somehow made the sterile corridors of a military vessel feel like home. Lieutenant Commander Victoria Nash, his first officer, had pulled him aside one day. "Sir, the crew's morale has never been higher. Whatever that woman's doing, it's working." Marcus had nodded, watching through the bridge viewport as Lorelei taught Ensign Timothy Brooks the finer points of Zephyrian poetry. "She makes us better, Victoria. All of us." The night before the Valiant was scheduled to leave Zephyrian space, Marcus and Lorelei had stood together on the planet's crystal cliffs, watching the aurora dance across the sky. The colors reflected in her eyes, and Marcus felt his heart clench, with the knowledge that this might be goodbye. "Come with me," he had whispered, taking her hands in his. Lorelei's expression had been sad but hopeful. "My people, they don't leave our worlds often. We're not like humans. Adventure doesn't call to us the same way. Then I'll request permanent diplomatic station here. I'll resign my commission if I have to." She had kissed him then, soft and sweet under the alien stars. "You would do that? Give up the stars for me? I'd give up everything for you," Marcus had replied, and meant every word. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. 3 days later, as Marcus was filing the paperwork for his transfer request, the distress call came through. Zephyrian colonies, under attack. Ships of unknown configuration striking without warning. The Valiant arrived too late. The crystal cities lay in ruins, their beautiful structures reduced to glittering fragments scattered across the landscape. Marcus had led the rescue teams personally, hope dying a little more with each empty building they searched. They found survivors in the emergency shelters, maybe a quarter of the population. But Lorelei wasn't among them. Elder Thessarian, the colony's leader, had gripped Marcus's arm with desperate strength. "They took the young ones," he whispered. "The females, of breeding age. They had lists, Marcus. They knew exactly who to take." "Who?" Marcus had demanded, though part of him already knew the answer. "Slavers. The hegemony. They've heard of our people's unique abilities. They plan to sell them to the highest bidders." Marcus had stood in the rubble of what had been Lorelei's home, her research scattered like autumn leaves in the wind. In his hand, he clutched the pendant she'd given him, a small crystal that glowed with the same inner light as her eyes. "I'll find her," he had whispered to the devastation around him. "I promise." He had no idea that promise would make him the galaxy's most wanted man. The hunt begins. 3 weeks after the Zephyrian massacre, Marcus Kane was no longer a captain in the United Earth Fleet. Admiral Reynolds had been sympathetic but firm during their final meeting in the sterile conference room aboard Luna Station. I understand your feelings, Marcus, but we can't authorize a military operation against the hegemony based on emotion. The political ramifications alone. Political ramifications? Marcus had slammed his fist on the polished table. They're selling sentient beings like cattle, William. Since when do we negotiate with slavers? Since those slavers control half the outer rim and have enough firepower to glass Earth if we push too hard. The Admiral's voice had softened. I'm sorry, Marcus, the answer is no. That was when Marcus had made his choice. He submitted his resignation that afternoon, along with a formal request to purchase his ship. The Valiant wasn't the newest vessel in the fleet, but she was fast, well-armed, and most importantly, she was his. Chief Engineer Dmitry Volkov was the first to volunteer. Captain, ex-captain, with respect, that ship needs someone who knows, her inside and out. These bolts won't hold themselves together. Navigator Jessica Jazz Martinez was next. My grandmother was sold into slavery on Kepler 442. I know what it's like to have family stolen. Count me in. Within a week, Marcus had his crew. Not all of them. The Valiant could operate with a skeleton complement, and that's what he got. 8 souls willing to risk everything for a woman most of them had barely known, but who had touched their lives in ways they couldn't explain. The first lead came from Tobias Rhett, an information broker operating out of the Nexus station. The man was greasy, nervous, and charged outrageous fees, but his intel was solid. Word is the hegemony's got a special auction coming up, Tobias had whispered across the cantina table. High-end merchandise, exotic species, the kind of thing that draws collectors from across the galaxy. Where? Marcus had asked, sliding a credit chip across the scarred surface. Station Perdition, in the Acheron system. But Kane. Tobias had grabbed his wrist as he started to leave. That place is a fortress. You go in there alone, you're never coming out. Marcus had smiled grimly. I won't be alone. The plan was simple in concept, impossible in execution. Station Perdition was indeed a fortress, a converted asteroid, base with enough firepower to hold off a battle fleet. It served as the hegemony's primary auction house for their most valuable merchandise, and security was absolute. But Marcus had advantages the hegemony didn't expect. He knew every trick the military taught, every tactic in the book. More importantly, he knew tricks they didn't teach, the kind you learned in back-alley fights and desperate situations. The first step was intelligence. Jazz used her connections in the smuggling community to map the station's defenses and schedules. Dmitry analyzed their power grid and found weaknesses in their shield generators. Medical Officer Thomas Webb studied hegemony physiology, looking for advantages human biology might provide. But it was communications specialist Rebecca Torres who provided the breakthrough. She'd been monitoring hegemony transmissions, looking for any mention of Lyrelay or the other Zephyrian captives. Marcus, you need to hear this. She called out from her station 3 days into their surveillance of Perdition. The transmission was encrypted, but Rebecca had cracked stranger codes. As the translation scrolled across her screen, Marcus felt ice form in his veins. The Zephyrian specimens are responding well to conditioning protocols. Subject designation Z7 shows particular promise. High intelligence markers, linguistic abilities. Recommend premium tier classification for auction. Estimated value, 2.3 million credits. Subject Z7. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering Lyrelay's laugh, the way she'd light up when discussing ancient literature. They'd reduced her to a number. There's more, Rebecca said quietly. The auction is in 4 days. Marcus. They're selling her to someone called the Collector. From what I can piece together, he's got a private museum of sentient species. Living specimens. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. 8 humans, alone in the darkness between stars, preparing to assault a fortress, to save someone who might already be lost. Marcus stood, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like an old coat. But this wasn't military command anymore. This was something deeper, more primal. All hands prepare for combat operations, he announced over the ship's comm. We're going to show the hegemony why you never threaten someone a human loves. In the depths of space, the Valiant altered course for Station Perdition, carrying 8 souls bound by loyalty and a promise that transcended species. Into the abyss, Station Perdition hung in the void like a metallic cancer, its surface bristling with weapons arrays and shield generators. The converted asteroid base was massive, easily 10 kilometers across at its widest point, and according to Jazz's intelligence network, it housed over 50,000 beings at any given time. Most were criminals, slavers, and black market dealers, but buried somewhere in its depths were innocent victims waiting for salvation or death. Marcus stood on the Valiant's bridge, studying the tactical display. 4 days of planning had led to this moment. The auction would begin in 6 hours, and somewhere in that fortress of twisted metal and cruelty, Lyrali was being prepared like livestock for sale. Passive scans complete, reported sensor operator Neil Blackburn, the youngest member of their crew at 23. I count 47 defensive platforms, minimum of 200 fighters on patrol, and those are just the ones broadcasting. Signatures. Shield analysis? Marcus asked. Dimitri looked up from his engineering console, grease staining his weathered hands. Multi-layered defensive grid. Primary shield can withstand bombardment from a dreadnought, but, he smiled grimly, shields that powerful require massive energy throughput. Create enough feedback in the right systems. The whole grid collapses for approximately 90 seconds before backup generators kick in, Jazz finished. Long enough for a small, fast ship to slip through, assuming we can create that feedback without alerting every guard in the system, added communications specialist Rebecca Torres, her fingers dancing across her console as she monitored hegemony chatter. The plan they'd devised was audacious, bordering on suicidal. Marcus would pilot a modified shuttle, stripped of everything non-essential and loaded with explosives, directly into Perdition's main docking bay during the shield collapse. Meanwhile, the Valiant would create a distraction on the opposite side of the station, drawing security forces away from the auction halls. Remember, Marcus addressed his crew, knowing this might be the last time he saw them alive. Your job isn't to destroy Perdition, it's to keep their attention long enough for me to find Lyrali and get out. If things go wrong, we improvise, interrupted Rebecca. That's what humans do, right? We adapt. Medical Officer Thomas Webb handed Marcus a small injector. Combat stimulants. Should keep you alert for about 4 hours, but you'll crash hard when it wears off. Marcus nodded, checking his sidearm one final time. He'd chosen an old Earth-made plasma pistol, not the most advanced weapon, but reliable and powerful enough to punch through most personal armor. Phase 1 is a go, announced Jazz from the pilot station. Initiating jamming sequence in 3, 2, 1. The Valiant's electronic warfare suite came online, flooding Perdition's sensors with false readings and white noise. For 30 crucial seconds, the station would be effectively blind to anything smaller than a frigate. Marcus launched in the shuttle, feeling the familiar acceleration press him into his seat. Through the viewport, he could see Perdition growing, larger, its surface detail becoming visible. Weapon emplacements, docking ports, and the massive shield generators that Dimitri was about to overload. Feedback cascade initiated, came Dimitri's voice over the comm. You've got 90 seconds, Marcus, make them count. The shields flickered and died, just as Marcus reached the outer perimeter. He pushed the shuttle's engines past their safety margins, diving toward the largest docking bay he could see. Behind him, space lit up with weapons fire as the Valiant began her distraction, drawing Perdition's defenses like moths to flame. The docking bay rushed up to meet him. Marcus cut engines at the last possible second and activated the emergency repulsors, bringing the shuttle down hard but intact. Alarms were already wailing throughout the station, and he could hear the thunder of boots on metal as security forces mobilized. The shuttle's rear compartment was packed with shaped charges, enough explosive to level a city block. Marcus set the timer for 10 minutes and sealed the craft. By then, he'd either be off the station with Lyrali, or they'd both be dead. Perdition's corridors were a maze of rusted metal and flickering lights. The station had grown organically, over decades, with new sections added wherever space allowed. Marcus followed the schematic Jazz had provided, moving toward the auction halls deep in the station's core. He encountered his first guards 3 levels down, 2 hegemony soldiers, in powered armor, their insectoid faces hidden behind tactical visors. They were focused on reports coming over their comm units about the attack on the station's outer defenses. Marcus didn't give them time to react. The plasma pistol's first shot took the nearest guard center mass, the superheated energy punching through his armor like paper. The second guard managed to raise his weapon before Marcus's second shot removed his head. 2 guards down, level 7. Marcus whispered into his comm. Proceeding to target zone. Rebecca's voice crackled back, through static. Multiple security teams converging on your location, they know you're inside. Marcus increased his pace, following signs written in a dozen different languages toward the auction halls. The deeper he went, the more luxurious the station became. Polished walls replaced rusted metal, and artificial gravity generators provided Earth-normal weight. He could hear voices ahead, the cultured tones of buyers discussing merchandise like it was artwork. Marcus checked his chronometer. 2 minutes until the auction began. 2 minutes to find Lyra lay among hundreds of potential slaves. The auction hall doors were guarded by 4 more soldiers, but they were facing inward, watching the crowd rather than the corridors. Marcus approached from their blind spot, moving with the silence his military training had drilled into him. The first guard died without knowing what hit him. The second managed to shout before Marcus's knife found his throat. The remaining 2 turned just in time to face their deaths. Through the doors, Marcus could see the auction hall, an amphitheater filled with beings from across the galaxy, all gathered to buy living sentience. On the central platform, a hegemony auctioneer was presenting the evening's special collection. And there, in a containment field that made her luminous skin seem dim and lifeless, was Lyra. Marcus felt something cold and terrible settle in his chest as he watched the woman he loved displayed like an object. The auctioneer was describing her unique properties and breeding potential to an audience that saw her as nothing more than exotic entertainment. He checked his plasma pistol's charge indicator and stepped into the auction hall. The bidding was about to begin, but Marcus Kane had other plans for this evening's entertainment. Part 4. The Collector's Gambit. The auction hall fell silent as Marcus stepped through the entrance, his plasma pistol raised and his finger steady on the trigger. 300 of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals and collectors turned to stare at the lone human who had somehow penetrated their fortress. On the central platform, Lyra's eyes widened with recognition and hope. The containment field holding her flickered with energy, but Marcus could see she was trying to communicate something. A subtle gesture toward the auction hall's upper levels. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted filth," Marcus announced, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "I'm here for the Zephyrian. Anyone who wants to leave with their internal organs properly arranged should start walking. Now." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. These were beings who trafficked in death and suffering across the galaxy. A single human, with a sidearm, was more entertainment than threat. The hegemony auctioneer, a tall mantis-like creature with compound eyes, clicked its mandibles in amusement. "Security to auction hall 7, it buzzed into its communicator. "We have a disruption." "Security's busy," Marcus replied conversationally, then put a plasma bolt through the auctioneer's center mass. The creature collapsed in a shower of ichor and smoking chitin. "Next volunteer?" That's when the real chaos began. The crowd surged toward the exits, but Marcus had positioned himself to control the main entrance. Anyone trying to leave had to get past him, and his military training made that a lethal proposition. The plasma pistol spoke again and again, each shot precisely placed. But Marcus wasn't just fighting the crowd. From the auction hall's upper galleries, he could see armed guards taking position. Sniper rifles and heavy weapons were being brought to bear on his location. "Lyra," he shouted over the screaming and weapons fire. "The control console, can you reach it?" She was already moving, her natural grace allowing her to navigate the containment field's energy patterns. Zephyrians had unique electromagnetic abilities, something their captors had either overlooked or underestimated. The first sniper's shot missed Marcus by centimeters, scoring the metal floor where he'd been standing. He rolled behind an overturned table and returned fire, watching with satisfaction as the shooter's position erupted in sparks and smoke. That's when he heard the slow clap. "Magnificent," came a cultured voice from the upper gallery. "Absolutely magnificent. Do you know how long it's been since I've seen such a display of primitive savagery?" Marcus looked up to see a figure in expensive robes standing in a private viewing box. Even from a distance he could tell this wasn't like the other buyers. This being radiated power and authority in a way that made the hair on Marcus's neck stand up. "The collector, I presume?" Marcus called out, keeping his weapon trained on the guards while speaking to the gallery. "Indeed, and you must be Captain Marcus Kane, formerly of the United Earth Fleet. Your reputation precedes you." The collector's voice held amusement as if this entire situation was merely an interesting diversion. "I must say, your tactical approach lacks subtlety, but the execution is admirable." "I didn't come here to impress you," Marcus snarled, putting another plasma bolt through a guard who'd gotten too close. "No, you came here for her." The collector gestured toward Lyreley, who was still working at the containment field controls. How wonderfully romantic. How deliciously human. The containment field flickered and died. Lyreley stumbled forward, her skin already beginning to regain its natural luminescence now that she was free of the energy suppression. "Marcus," she breathed, and the sound of his name on her lips made everything he'd risked worthwhile. But the collector wasn't finished. "You know, Captain Kane, I was planning to purchase your lovely companion for my private collection, but now I'm thinking she might be even more valuable as bait." The gallery windows exploded inward as armed figures repelled into the auction hall. These weren't ordinary hegemony soldiers. They moved with professional precision, their equipment military grade, their tactics coordinated. "My personal guard," the collector explained conversationally, as his mercenaries began surrounding Marcus and Lyreley. "Former special forces from a dozen different species, they're quite good at what they do." Marcus grabbed Lyreley's hand and pulled her behind the auction platform, using the raised stage as cover. His plasma pistol was down to 30% charge, and he was facing at least 20 professional killers. "The shuttle," he whispered to Lyreley. "In 10 minutes, it's going to remove a significant portion of this station. We need to be elsewhere when that happens." Her violet eyes met his, and he saw the same determination that had first attracted him to her. "There's a service tunnel beneath the platform. It leads to the station's power core. That's the opposite direction from escape." Lyreley smiled grimly. "Marcus, do you trust me?" Before he could answer, the collector's mercenaries began their assault. Military-grade weapons lit up the auction hall, turning expensive furnishings into burning debris. Marcus returned fire, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. That's when Lyreley did something unexpected. She placed her hands against the auction platform's metal surface and closed her eyes in concentration. "What are you—" Marcus began, then stopped as every light in the auction hall began to flicker. Zephyrians weren't just naturally luminescent. They were electromagnetic beings, capable of interfacing directly with electronic systems when sufficiently motivated. And Lyreley had just been tortured, caged, and nearly sold into slavery. She was very motivated. The station's lights went out, completely, plunging the auction hall into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, but by then Marcus and Lyreley were gone, vanishing into the service tunnel she'd located. Behind them, the collector's laughter echoed through the darkened hall. "Run, little humans, run. The hunt is always more exciting than the capture." As they crawled through maintenance tunnels toward an uncertain escape, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just made an enemy far more dangerous than the hegemony itself. Above them, his shuttle's timer continued counting down, and somewhere in the station's depths, the collector was planning his next move. Stardust and steel, the service tunnel was barely wide enough for 2 people. filled with the hum of power conduits and the acrid smell of recycled air. Marcus followed Lorelei through the cramped space, trusting her electromagnetic senses to guide them through Station Perdition's mechanical arteries. "The power core is 3 levels down," she whispered, her skin providing the only light in the narrow passage. "If I can interface with the main system, I can overload their containment protocols." "What about the other prisoners?" Marcus asked, checking his chronometer. 6 minutes until the shuttle detonated. "That's exactly what I'm thinking." Lorelei's eyes glowed brighter in the darkness. "Every slave, every captive, every innocent being locked in these cells, they all go free tonight." Behind them, they could hear the collector's forces searching the auction hall. Voices echoed through the station's corridors as security teams coordinated their hunt. The entire fortress was mobilizing to recapture one Zephyrian and eliminate one human who dared to challenge their system. They emerged into a vast chamber that housed Station Perdition's power core, a massive fusion reactor that provided energy for the entire facility. The space was filled with control consoles, monitoring stations, and safety systems that would normally require a team of engineers to operate. But Lorelei wasn't a normal engineer. She approached the main control matrix and placed her hands against the interface panel. Immediately, displays throughout the chamber began flickering to life, showing system readouts, security protocols, and detention center layouts. "Marcus," she breathed, her voice filled with horror as she accessed the station's records. "There are over 2,000 captives here, children, families, entire populations stolen from their worlds." Marcus felt the familiar cold rage building in his chest, the same feeling that had driven him to resign his commission and assault a fortress. But now it was different. Now it was personal and universal at the same time. "Free them all," he said simply. Lorelei nodded and closed her eyes, her consciousness diving deep into Perdition's electronic nervous system. Throughout the station, cell doors began opening. Force fields deactivated. Security lockdowns failed. Thousands of prisoners, who had been resigned to death or slavery, suddenly found themselves free. That's when the collector arrived. "Fascinating," came the cultured voice from the chamber's entrance. The robed figure stood flanked by his mercenaries, weapons trained on Marcus and Lorelei. "I've never seen a Zephyrian interface so completely with a foreign system. The potential applications are remarkable." Marcus raised his plasma pistol, though he knew it was futile against so many opponents. "Let her finish." "Oh, I intend to," the collector replied, "but not for the reasons you think. You see, Captain Kane, I've been collecting unique specimens for over 3 centuries. Rare beings, unusual abilities, extraordinary individuals, but I've never encountered anything quite like what you two represent." "We're not specimens," Marcus growled. "Aren't you? A human who would sacrifice everything for love. A Zephyrian who would burn down the galaxy for justice. Together you represent something I've only heard about in legends. The perfect symbiosis of passion and purpose." The collector stepped closer, seemingly unconcerned by Marcus's weapon. "I'm going to make you both an offer. Join my collection willingly, and I'll ensure the other prisoners reach safe worlds. Refuse, and I'll recapture every single one of them after I've dealt with you." Marcus felt Lorelei's hand squeeze his arm. Through their connection, he could sense her thoughts, her plan forming even as she continued interfacing with the station's systems. "There's a third option," she said softly, her skin beginning to glow brighter. "Which is? We bring this entire station down around your ears." The power core began to whine, its safety systems registering dangerous fluctuations. Throughout Perdition, lights flickered and systems failed as Lorelei poured her consciousness into the station's infrastructure. The collector's mercenaries raised their weapons, but Marcus was already moving. His plasma pistol spoke 3 times in rapid succession, dropping the nearest soldiers before they could fire. But there were too many of them, and his weapons' charge was nearly depleted. That's when the cavalry arrived. Dmitry Volkov came through the chamber's service entrance like an avenging angel, his engineer's toolkit replaced by a military-grade pulse rifle. Behind him were Jazz Martinez and Rebecca Torres, armed and ready for war. Thought you might need backup, Dmitri called out as he laid down covering fire, the rest of the crew's securing an escape route. How did you... Your shuttle's still. Got 2 minutes on the timer, Jazz explained, her own weapon adding to the chaos. Plenty of time to extract you and collapse this monument to slavery. The firefight that followed was brief, but vicious. The Collector's mercenaries were professionals, but they were facing humans who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. When the shooting stopped, only the Collector remained standing among his forces. Remarkable, he said, seemingly unperturbed by the destruction around him. Absolutely remarkable. You've just confirmed my thesis about human potential. Your thesis can go to hell, Marcus replied, helping Lyrelei to her feet. She was pale, exhausted from her interface with the power core, but her eyes still held that inner fire he loved. Perhaps, but consider this. I am not the only Collector in the galaxy. Word of tonight's events will spread. You've made yourself and your species targets for beings far worse than the hegemony. Lyrelei stepped forward, her skin blazing with electromagnetic energy. Then they'll learn the same lesson you did tonight. When you threaten someone a human loves, you face all of humanity's fury. The Collector laughed, but there was something different in the sound now, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. We'll see, he said, and vanished in a swirl of robes and shadow. Some kind of personal teleportation device, Marcus realized. They'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. 1 minute, Jazz announced, checking her chronometer. Time to go. They fought their way back through Perdition's corridors, now filled with freed prisoners streaming toward escape pods and stolen ships. The station was coming apart around them, systems failing as Lyrelei's electromagnetic assault took its toll. The Valiant was waiting where they'd left her, docked at an auxiliary port. As Marcus strapped himself into the captain's chair, he looked around at his crew, 8 humans who had risked everything for a promise made to an alien woman. All hands prepare for immediate departure, he announced over the comm. Through the viewport he could see dozens of ships fleeing Station Perdition as freed prisoners escaped to whatever lives awaited them among the stars. In 30 seconds, his shuttle would detonate, adding one final exclamation point to the evening's work. Marcus, Lyrelei said softly, taking his hand as the Valiant pulled away from the doomed station. Yeah? Thank you. For keeping your promise. Marcus squeezed her luminous fingers and smiled. Behind them, Station Perdition disappeared in a flash of light and debris, taking with it one of the galaxy's most notorious slave markets. But somewhere in the darkness between stars, other Collectors were taking notice. And humanity had just announced itself as a force to be reckoned with in the cosmic game of predator and prey. The promise had been kept. The nightmare was just beginning. And Marcus Kane wouldn't have it any other way.